The project is a collaboration with Peaceful Mind Foundation and APA's Community Learning Hive. And it's important to recognise both Peaceful Mind Foundation are able to give this project a global platform that APA on its own would never have been able to reach. Endorsement, support and assistance in producing the framework and bringing it to a global audience. Great. APA's Community Learning, our training and coaching division, and within the framework, as I'll explain as we go through, we are able to bring these frameworks are needed. And it is vital that we understand that for a mental health program to work at any services around that. So I'm delighted that within the audience this afternoon, we have some of those this framework is supporting. We have MAP with Caroline Flynn, who is an amazing producer of resource require mental health improvements. We have Glenda D. Roberts, who provides an amazing placement service for therapeutics. That the therapeutic education pathway is a component factor in the delivery of mental health, then we are missing a right. And Glenda's experience and knowledge of that placement environment is phenomenally beneficial in ensuring that we get the right professional. So I think it's pretty safe to say everyone in the room would have said mental health is in crisis. Our systems were not operating optimally. There was an efficiency break, struggling to get professionals in front of those that were in need. And that led to its own challenges for those individuals. But no 40 years has the mental health system itself acknowledged its component within the system. Nobody lives in a vacuum. The mental health system becomes a part of the world that we all live in. And we contribute to mental health, good, bad, or indifferently, then we are doing ourselves a disservice, but we are all simple truth. The mental health system was never fit for purpose. It was never designed with systems, were never. It was mental health was always a plug-on, an add-on, an afterthought. And in 2019, we were starting to gain volume, but it was also starting to take shape as to what the solutions could be. We decided to deliver coronavirus. And if we thought the mental health system was in crisis at that point, on what potential reality can the entire world is in grief? The system can't cope as it was. We have to understand that the things that the mental health is not something that just happens because something else happened. Constant. Just as our physical health is constant. Just as our emotional well-being is constant. The mental being battered with a predominance of physical health in all things to do with the human. Over-medicalization has had a massive impact on pushing the mental and emotional well-being further away from residents. The mental health system has also produced statistics like 1 in 4 people have mental health issues. This goes against everything that we know. This process just endorses the psychological stigmatization. Think about 4 of your friends to you. Then if we listen to the mental health service, then it's you that has the issue. And everyone else is okay. This can be dangerous trauma. The professionalization of a vocational system alienates and creates elitist barriers in order to become a therapeutic professional, counts out so many talented potential professionals. And while, yes, needs to be in place, but over 50 years across the Western world, we have made therapeutic, psychological, we have counted people out when we need more people in. And now the world is grieving. We're all experiencing grief. We're all, system needs to step up. That's pretty hard to hear. So I have two questions to the entire sector. Are you ready? And are you ready to grow and make a difference? We have heard from therapeutic organizations, from psychological, make a change. And again, this shows a lack of understanding of psychology itself. Every single human ever possible. It's the one thing we fight against, even though every day we are changing. So why does the psychological system promote what is happening inside all of us every single day, which is growth? Let's harness the growth so we make a difference. The talk of change in the psychological field for decades. So let's stop using that approach. It makes no sense. APA was formed with three core principles: empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. So at this point, CEO, most of you have already met her at some point, heard her speak, but for today, she can't be in the room. So I hope this will help. Siobhan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Just a tiny little bit. It's based on three core conditions: empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regards. But the reason it's so important is with congruence, it creates transparency. Transparency creates sympathy. So you are who you are. Empathy. It's not sympathy, it's not feeling sorry for somebody. It's learning to walk in somebody else's shoes. Being able to discipline yourself to set aside every thought of your own in front of clients. Be able to work with your unconditional positive regards. Well, if therapists can't accept and respect the kindness that they ought to be in front of their client, we cannot accept the person in front of us. How do we help that person learn to accept themselves? Are incredibly powerful as they create an organic belief that client in the right conditions will all once upon a time in relation to Carl Rogers, and it's based on core conditions. The core conditions of growth: one potato put in the dark, one left to fester. The one in the light fed, got its warmth, and was quite comfortable where it was in the sun. One grew, one grew, and essentially got thrown away. That ethos works for human beings. And whatever modality, that without empathy, without congruence, without unconditional positive regards, we will never be as good as they ought to be. It's also important that these apply to ourselves. So being open with ourselves, our own thought, with that side which doesn't cause negativity. Empathy with ourselves. It's important to forgive ourselves for our mistakes, but learn unconditional positive regard. When we use that with ourselves, we respect ourselves. The impact of that creates confidence. And people often mix up confidence and arrogance. It can be so different to being vain about yourself. Sometimes people get caught in this trap of, God, doesn't she love herself so much? It's about being kind to yourself, recognizing when you make a mistake, appreciating that mistake through yourself, and forgiving yourself with your own knowledge of what you've done and how you behave, and learning not to repeat it all the time. Doesn't ever stop me loving anybody else, but it also means I keep my own self-worth in check, and I look after myself by respect myself and other people. This is the baseline of all positive relationships. Thank you.
Can you imagine the power of that being rolled out to everyone across the globe, of being able as professionals to be able to reach that? Can't be done in the current systems. It can't be done unless every single person asks for it. And there we've tripped on the stigmatizing into our day-to-day consciousness. The framework APA has put together starts with these 9 steppings that allow every single professional, every single educator, every single social care practitioner, every single mental health, these elements into their day-to-day so that they ripple out to the people that they engage with. And when we have these 9 steps, a lot easier to get across the canyon that has been created in relation to mental health. If we do not have self-worth and self-confidence that need that support, if we do not have our own cognitive pathways and the consciousness of them, how can we empower anyone to develop their own? If we do not have the motivation to allow this growth, we will never engage, not continually personally develop. If we do not seek to get our own psychological resilience, then our reaction and our communication skills will stay as they were when we were at our weakest point. And our consistent. We have the power in ourselves as individual beings, sentient beings. We've got one that we lock away and don't use because the world around us tells us to. So what are the roots of the evolution? Systemic and national leadership must become psychologically aware. Emotional well-being, crime reduction, and children's social care. These are the 5 areas I've been crying out for the psychological world to understand, to connect with, to grow in. And for decades, they have been saying the same. This framework is the first framework that I've been able to research in over a year that brings all of these, a single point of focus where all of these areas are able to take the psychological within, rather than have mental health and psychological awareness as an afterthought on these 5 areas in the way policy and engagement of mental health can be looked at. And in the back of a year of the pandemic, and by no means is it, now is the time where we can look at each of these 5 areas in a different way. And we can start building things. So, systemic leadership, systemic and national leadership. And it's important to include national leadership, and I'll explain a little. But our leadership has been shaped for the last 70 years without psychological awareness and afterthought. How can I make my leadership style conscious of mental health and the impacts that I have? But I don't want to add on what I do. Doesn't work. We need effective policy formation from the start with psychological awareness, cognitive training, understanding that if they do not have psychologically focused communication, then they'll be trusted, will never be understood, and will never be believed. And in a time of pandemic, we need leaders who are trusted, who are understood. But if they do not put that training, that support system into their own awareness, they will never achieve it. There needs to be an alignment of core departments, whether that's in a company or whether that's in a country. And without that, people falling through the gaps of support services. And if there is no executive psychological leadership, nothing will change. Leaders can talk about mental health until the cows come home. But until they understand what it is they are talking about, they wait. And then blaming the rain for having lost their voice. It's time to change our leadership. Education is the first point of the framework that ACRA is proposing. 4 pillars of wisdom. Preschool and community learning frameworks have to be changed. Children, we understand how life. When you try and impose an education system before they've got that lockdown in place, they will always start for it. They will always be still trying to formulate who they are as individuals, and now you're loading more information into them. That has education systems around the world. We generally highlight Japan, Scandinavia. Top 2 education systems that accept that general education until they are at least 7. The framework we are proposing not only endorses to make sure that the pre-schooling knowledge is shared and there is a framework for that, so parents have an understanding, so that they can develop and they can be open to the education system at the right time. We're advocating vocational, emotional, and social balance. We have seen communities decimated by the breakdowns libraries, as an example. Millions of books sitting gaining dust in storage, yet our education system, community services. We need to understand emotional learning is key. It's a standard joke that is, so how does that make you feel? But we talk about mental. Surely that's about psychological, that's about how we think, about their emotional response to circumstances. Let's get emotional awareness into the psychological and the mental, because if we don't feel it, we can't think it. If we can't think it, we can't act on it. We have connection as entities. This is not just let's rewrite the curriculum. Coaching-based learning rather than formulaic learning is the first differently. Everyone learns at different speeds and at different paces. For 250 years, our education system believed that the world was a sausage machine. You came in at one end, you go through the system, you come out as a nice little sausage at the end, ready to go. And it's time for that sausage machine mentality to end. It is starting to. We are seeing a different world, but we have to embrace it. And we need to see collaborative partnerships with employers and community, where education, if we do not have these connections, then we keep the education system in a vacuum that is irrelevant to the rest of the world, to anybody that is going through education. But I want to hand back to Siobhan for a moment and let her give some psychological input when it gets there. Stuck again. There we go. Over to you, Siobhan.
Psychology and education are developing through the education system is to feel supported, safe, and educated. And when we have teachers that know trauma, the child doesn't understand what they're actually reacting to, but they are reacting. When a child is guided to understand a way could change the outcome for them, changes everything. And one of the most important things I believe in is the earliest feel. I feel angry, I feel hurt, I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel anxious, etc., etc. We are understood much quicker and much faster by other people. When the teachers talk from that place, it is bound by trust and honour and the safety of that child. And that child is a priority within the education, being interwoven through education. We know that as we grow into adults, I'd ask every one of you to think back and feel disappointed, because we lose that art. By having that art and language ingrained into us, how we feel, it means that it will be received in a much more positive way. And teachers coming from the same between the children and the adults will change dramatically in their outcomes. And one of the most important things of education, psychological education, changes everything. A really good example of this is anxiety. When anxiety stops us from being able to concentrate, which actually stops us from being able to absorb information in confidence, and an increase in low self-esteem. By learning even the ability to be able to assist that entire process. I call it the 4 C's. When we are calm, we can concentrate. When we concentrate, when we feel confident, it automatically and organically increases our confidence. One of the biggest lessons, it needs to be introduced to schools. Teachers need to be aligned with the children in their care. And the two working together will change the outcome. Thank you for listening.
It's pretty powerful to hear just how some simple awareness can be such. The third part of the framework are 3 key areas. First, contact protocols with children's social care must be adapted. They must evolve. We have to, in order to help prevent interventions by empowering families and young people. We know that the children's social care arena has some of the toughest people to reach. Psychological approaches, we create a barrier to support. People go into survival mode and families try to protect. The system needs to use that energy for the benefit of that family, for those young people. And we do that through empowerment. Let's see what the boss has to say on this one.
Social care designed to support families. It needs to change. If professionals within social care are aware themselves, their own ability to work with children and with families will achieve a much greater impact. We understand in that one movement of that child going into care, there's more trauma. We understand the power of working as a team and collaborating. Learning to be self-aware, psychologically alert, as we call it at APA. It will enhance their own ability to be able to and educate and help both parties, children and parents, work with each other. Life. When they understand this, there's an organic change. When they appreciate that it's not their fault, that they are communicating and interacting with people around them, the results will be astounding. And the most important thing for me, as there is with social workers, the more they'll be able to incorporate that awareness in relation to their own clients, and that's children and parents alike. Working as a team is what social workers and families is what social services ought to be about. There is no I in them. It's guiding, it's nurturing. It's when that happens, the sooner change will occur.
Well said.
We have to move away from the flawed systems that have created survival mode operation. Now, with the impact of the pandemic, it's even more important that we get this particular rather than later. The 4 key areas that APA has identified and is putting together in our framework are skills for interaction and creative business development. When we hear employers routinely say the same child whenever they engage with a young person, then something is going wrong in the preparation of those young people. It's not the young person's fault. They're taught how to interact. They are never given the building blocks that they are going to need for work outside. Misnomer at this current time to include employability at a time when the world is losing employment. The situation with employment will not last. Take this opportunity and say, while the situation out there is what it is, let's get the building blocks put back in place. Then we are going to fall over when those doors open. Businesses will fail if they do not have the available simply because